It is a glorious day today in the UK, and I wanted to come on to talk about user feedback. So I've been running a lot of sessions recently around usability testing, user interviews, one-on-one sessions, and just generally getting a feel for how people move through their lives and the experiences they follow to try and influence the design direction that I take with the products that I'm working on. So there are certain tips that I've used time and time again, which are becoming more and more prevalent as I'm working through research at the minute. And there's three key areas that I want to touch on, which through personal experience, you can apply to any of these user research techniques in some way. And particularly if you're a solo designer or don't have that seniority in your team where you can learn this stuff and you want to progress yourself, then hopefully you can take some guidance and advice away from these and start to apply them yourself. The first one is a two-in-one. So we've got avoiding assumptions and avoiding leading questions. So if we start with assumptions, so if we think about how this might manifest in user research sessions. So if we take a user interview scenario where you're asking a series of questions to try and understand how people feel, their attitudes towards certain experiences, and use that information to then improve your product experience for the better. So you may have a set of scripted questions, or you may be kind of being a bit more fluid with how you're positioning certain things. Whatever the technique you're using, it can be easy to fall into the trap of making assumptions when you ask certain questions. So for example, if you're working on, let's say, an e-commerce experience and you're looking to find out more about the purchasing habits of a particular type of user, then you could be forgiven to ask something like, how often do you purchase this product? So the first thing there is that you've made the assumption that they've purchased it at least once. And you're starting to kind of move towards the idea that they are making repeat purchases about a particular product. Now, even if you're fairly confident this person has bought a particular product in the past, which is why you're speaking to them, it's always really valuable to try and take a step back, remove any previous assumptions or things that you think you know about that user from that particular discussion, and just ask a lot more open-ended questions that don't lie with particular assumptions. Now, the reason being is that if you ask that type of question and let's say, great, they have made a repeat purchase for this particular product. Okay, you may have been correct in that assumption. However, the feedback you're going to get from that question is probably going to be much less valuable than if you're going to be asking a more open-ended question. So you might just get a response that, yes, I did make a purchase. I purchased this 3 times and I was happy with it. Okay. You may get some kind of response along those lines. However, if you broaden the scope much wider and just ask them about, I guess first of all, ask them if they've ever purchased this product. Okay, so you may get a simple answer, but what that allows you to do is that allows you to stack multiple questions on top of that and start to build up a picture of their purchasing habits through this particular product. So you can lead on to, was this a repeat purchase? Okay. How did you find that experience coming back to the product? And you can start to tailor the questioning based on the actual responses you're getting in the moment. And that's always going to lead to much more valuable insights than if you just start with a very loaded question that has assumptions and just generally kind of leaves a lot of insight on the table. So try and avoid making assumptions wherever possible. The second part to this tip is all about leading questions and crucially, avoiding leading questions. So if you run a quick Google search about user research or UX research techniques, one of the first things you're going to come across is the topic of leading questions. Now, if you're not familiar with this, it's effectively kind of leading people down the path of answering a question in a certain way. So I've bundled this with assumptions because it's quite similar in the fact that you're framing a question in a particular way that is more than likely going to influence the way somebody responds. So if we're sticking to that user interview scenario and you're trying to avoid leading questions, it's best to kind of steer away from using kind of emotive words and things. So for example, if we think one question might be as simple as, did you enjoy the experience of purchasing this product? Or how positive did you feel while going through this journey? That might seem quite impartial and open-ended. However, if you notice, we use words such as enjoy and positive, and this could go the other way and you could frame things in a negative light. And even if the person does feel that way, already you've kind of influenced how they're going to respond. Because you've spun it in a positive way, people are more likely to kind of recollect things using that particular emotion that you've instilled in the question. It's not always the case. However, more times than not, people will then kind of start to think about things using those emotions that you've kind of baked into that questioning. And again, what that can do is it can lead to kind of biases that you've kind of then passed on to the user, and they will then respond using those biases, and actually they may not be true. So again, you're compromising the quality of research insights that you're potentially going to get from these discussions and from these testing sessions, just by kind of adding these emotive feelings and these particular words as part of those questions. So a better way to approach that might be to be completely open-ended and just ask them, tell me about your experience of purchasing this product, or walk me through your process when using this particular site or service. So you're just getting people to open up a lot more about their experience and their journeys, and this is always going to lead to a lot more valuable insights because you'll start to understand the end-to-end process they follow, and then how the experience that you're designing can then help to facilitate that and ultimately provide a greater experience for them. So there's the first one. The next one is trying to use, I guess, speak the same language, right? So you want to use terms and phrases that your particular participant is using. So this can equally be prevalent within user interviews as much as usability testing, where somebody's actually stepping through a product experience and you're kind of observing their behaviors. They might say particular phrases or words to describe the interface that maybe perhaps you don't use. So if you think about like naming conventions for particular components that you maybe use internally with engineers, product managers, just part of the team, you talk about elements of the interface in a particular way. Just be mindful that the end users are more than likely going to use a different term to describe part of the interface. And if you can start to pick up on the terms that they use, then if you use those phrases in the questions that you ask or the prompts that you introduce, it's going to make them feel heard. It's going to break down some barriers, and it's going to make sure that you're speaking a very consistent and similar language, which can then ultimately in turn lead to more valuable insights to the questions and prompts that you position to them. So as a very basic example, you might hear people talk about a like item grid potentially. Let's say there's some kind of grid view in the product and the user keeps calling it an item grid. Maybe this is something that you've never considered as part of the naming convention. However, if you start to use that phrase in the questions you ask, it's going to make the person feel like you're paying attention and you're speaking the same language. And just try and pick up on these phrases and use them in the questions that you ask. It's always going to be a positive outcome in those situations. And the third and final tip I'm going to give you is to try and stay on track with the research goal. So the first thing to mention there is that it's always useful to have an overall goal for any research that you conduct, whether that's testing a product experience with a prototype or a live environment, whether it's generative exploratory sessions and interviews, always going in there with a goal. and a particular outcome that you're trying to reach is going to help you direct that research in the way that it needs to go. So this doesn't mean over-prescribing, that you need people to say certain things or you're looking for particular specific outputs. It's more just kind of getting an understanding that you're going into these sessions with the desired outcome of finding out how people behave in a certain scenario, or their true feelings and attitudes towards a certain part of your product. And then you can use that as kind of the guide to position your questioning and your prompts. And if you have this in mind as you're running through these research sessions, you can always pull things back to make sure you're achieving that objective. So if we take an example of a usability test, and let's say you're working with 8 different participants and you're having them work through a particular user journey using a design prototype, and you want to keep things pretty consistent to make sure you're getting consistent output from each session. And there's going to be times when people veer off, and if it's a live product environment, they might start clicking through different areas. And if you're looking to get them through to an end state, so let's say the task is to move towards a purchase of a type of product, and you're looking to see how people navigate to that end goal and convert, there's inevitably going to be different ways that people navigate through the products, through the sites, and then it doesn't mean they're not going to get there in the end, but it does mean that they have different ways of going about things, which is absolutely fine. This is how you find out how people actually behave when using your product. However, there can be the risk that people kind of veer off too much, and maybe you start seeing them explore different parts of the product, and maybe they go into a mode of kind of browsing as they normally would in their own environments and kind of just forget about the task altogether. It's important for you as the moderator and the facilitator to kind of bring them back onto that path there, because ultimately you're going to lose out on insights if you let the time pass and you've not actually got to that end goal in some shape or form. Now, it's fine if you don't get there because people have been hung up on certain parts of the journey. However, when it's completely taken away from that journey altogether and you start looking at a different part of the product, or if you're in an interview and people start to go down a rabbit hole, it can be tempting to kind of, sometimes it is a good thing. Sometimes you get insights that you wouldn't normally get as part of generative research because you're kind of leaving it wide open. However, sometimes you want to kind of reach a point where you've got people's response about a certain subject or reached a certain goal in a prototype. So you do want to kind of bring them back on track. So it all depends on the goal of the research, but just be mindful that you want to make sure you're getting a kind of a set of outcomes that align to that goal. And particularly when you're working with multiple participants, you want to make it consistent and equal in terms of the questions that you ask and the journey that they follow, because that's how you can start to spot trends in the outcomes and the results that you get from each of those sessions. So absolutely let people kind of veer off, and you can start to go down some tangents if it means getting more valuable insights, but especially if you're working to a particular research goal, always try and bring them back on track to make sure you're getting the most valuable insights from your studies. And those are the 3 tips. As I mentioned at the start, these can be applied to any different research method that you're using in some way, shape or form, and they really help me as I run these sessions myself. Let me know in the comments if you've came across any similar scenarios, or if you've got any other tips or techniques that you use in your user research methods, and let everyone know. I'm sure everyone would love to hear about those. And if you found this valuable, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.